Hello everyone, this is Nicole. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you are staying safe and healthy. I am creating a video in celebration of Altenew's 6th birthday. Altenew is turning 6 in April, which is this month, and we are doing a fun blog hop. We thought it would be fun to add some positivity and some different fun things to do with all of you. So we decided to go ahead and do the blog hop to celebrate and share some inspirations that you can use while you're spending more time indoors. So in this video, which is my longest video yet, I added a lot of information and walking you through some of my process when it comes to creating projects or working with a brand new watercolor set. That way you can kind of follow along and find the tips that might be helpful to you. In this video, I'm going to use Artist 24 watercolor pen set. This was actually released in March, and I actually just getting around to playing with my actual set. I've played with the colors before when I was testing prototypes, but this is actually my own set, and now I'm going to set up so that I can start using it for projects I'm going to create today. So as you can see, I lift the pan holder tin plate from the tin case, and this is pretty much the same with any metallic tin case that you'll see that holds a full pan or half pan set for watercolor pancakes. And I'm going to lift up all the stickers and added it to or put them onto the foam pad that came with the artist pen set. I would usually throw them away, but this has pigment information that I wanted to keep for my other swatch that I'm going to create in detail. And I'll share that in a couple of weeks after I share this video. But this will help me understand which pigment was used to create this particular color. So as you can see, I'm just lifting up the sticker from each half pans and putting them onto the foam pad and then putting the pans back. And here I realize that there is a color printed on one side of the watercolor pen set. So the bottom row will need to be rotated so that the printed side is actually facing up, so you can easily refer to each row to see which color is which. And I'll show you once everything is done so you can see what I'm referring to. So after taking out the bottom row pans, I took off the stickers and then I rotated so that the printed color side is going to face upwards, and then put it back to the tin. One thing you need to know is that these watercolor pen set that is released from Altenew, including the 36 pen set that was released earlier, they are customized colors. So it'll be a different pigment than the actual single watercolor pigments that you see traditionally in watercolor setting. So this is so that we can create colors that fit all of our existing color line or to coordinate nicely. It was to make it easier for you to use colors along with the ink pads or the markers that we have. So that's why the pigment information is a little bit different than the traditional ones that you'll see. So keep that in mind when working with these. I'm going to go ahead and create swatch. Now that I peeled off all of the stickers, I'm going to use Altenew's 9x12 watercolor paper pad that was released last month as well. And this is a bigger sheet, so I'm going to always keep extra sheet that I'm not using for other projects. So I went ahead and pre-created the swatches to save you time. You don't have to watch me putting all those masking tape one by one, but basically this fits perfectly within the artist pen set, so you can carry it with you whenever you take the pen. This is measuring 8 1/4 by 2 1/4, and I use a 1/8 inch masking tape. Each block is about 1/2 inch and a little bit less than a 1 inch. So that's the width and the height of each block. So it has 12 on each row, making up to 24 blocks. You can add colors in there. And I'm going to lift up the palettes again from the pen set so we can go ahead and create the swatches. This is going to be just a quick color reference swatches. I'm going to include it in the pen set. So it doesn't have to be super perfect, but enough where you can understand the colors and see how they transition from dark to light when adding more water. So I'm going to start with white, although you don't really need to reference the white, but it's there, so I just include it in the swatch. And I'm going to add the pigment on the top row, and then as I go down, I'm going to add more water so I can blend them out and create a shading effect. And then after I put down the white one, I realized I should have done this before, where I draw a line with a black Sharpie so I can see a bit of transparency within the swatch. So what I am doing is going with each color, dropping the pigment where it's going to be the darkest, and then going back to my water and then adding the water within the block so that I can easily see how it transitioned from the darkest to the lightest. I recommend that you don't add too much water because it's actually going to seep within that masking tape area, and when I do lift it later on, you'll see what I'm referring to, but I do ended up going over just a little bit, like the water was seeping within underneath the tape area. So I don't think I stuck the masking tape firmly. But regardless, this is a great way to refer to the colors, and I'm going to continue coloring each of them, and then I'll be back once I am done swatching everything. All right, so now all the swatch is completed for each block, and you can see how pretty it is. I did let it dry fully. If you're short on time, you can use a hair dryer or you can use a heat gun. Once it's fully dry, we're going to lift up the masking tape one by one, and I think this is the most satisfying thing ever. After a hard work of swatching out all the colors, this is really nice to see. And you can see that some colors seeped underneath the masking tape area, but that's okay. I think it's still good to create a swatch like this for each watercolor pan set that you might have or other watercolor pigment that you have to understand the colors better. And whenever you create a swatch, I highly recommend using the watercolor paper that you use the most, because the way that watercolor acts is very dependent of the paper that you use. So don't use a special paper just for swatches and use different type of paper for your projects. I highly recommend you stick to the paper that you always use when creating swatches. That's going to help you understand the color and how it flows, the amount of water that it holds as well. So now that it's all completed and looking pretty, I'm going to go ahead and add color names using an archival pen. You can use any pen that is archival so that it won't fade away or it will get smudges when sometimes get in contact with water. In cases like that, it'll be good to have a permanent pen to use for each color. So I'm going to just write it down on the bottom of each swatches, and you can still see the color transitions nicely. All right, I am almost done writing the colors now. And now this swatch is complete and ready to go on to the pen set. Since the pen set has a 2 section for the lids, so it's actually top where in the middle where the pen set is there, and then the bottom mixing plate. So I'm going to keep this on the top so that it can be kept clean and be away from the pigments itself. Now we are going to go ahead and create the project. So now this is actually the second part of the video, and this is why the video is so long today, because we are making swatches and also making a card. So I cut down the same watercolor paper you used for the swatch here, and I cut it down to be a 4.5 by 5.5. I will actually be using a finished panel to measure 4 by 5.25 to fit my A2 size card. But when it comes to watercoloring, I always like to create just a tad larger area because we're going to add a lot of water, so the paper gets warped. So I wanted to later on just have a cleaner edges. So that's why I add a 1/4 inch more than the panel size I'm going to be using. So here I chose a big flower from the Floral Garden stamp set, flower garden stamp set, excuse me, and it is filled with beautiful, beautiful flower images. I chose the big one. We're going to color them and create a background and also a focal point. So the center image has a full bloom of the flower, and I am adding partial images of the bloom throughout the panel. So you can see that I am stamping each time with embossing ink and then pouring a white embossing powder. And then we're going to move on to the next one. This is going to give me a better idea where to stamp so that it doesn't overlap. After that is all done, I'm going to heat set this. So make sure your heat gun is warmed up nice and hot, and you can minimize the time to heat set the powders and also minimize the time warping the paper. So we're going to go ahead and heat set this nicely. Make sure to use a static powder, anti-static powder, when using the heat embossing and stamping and pouring embossing powder onto the project so that it doesn't stick to everywhere. That's very, very important. So now that's all done. Now we can finally go ahead and color. I'm only going to use 2 colors from this pan set actually. I'm going to use Red Sunset and then maybe Red Cosmo for the center portion of this main flower. And for the other ones, I'm going to use Tea Party. So we're going to do some pink and then some darker coral and then the lighter orangish peach coral. I wanted to make sure the main flower that I'm coloring right now is going to be the darkest and more vibrant than the other ones that's surrounding it. So it'll not only act as a background, but it'll also help this main flower pop out and stand out nicely. So what I am doing here is pre-wetting the surface I'm going to color, and I am dropping a very light shade of Red Sunset. You're going to mix in just a little bit of pigment and then a lot of water, and that's going to give me a base and a section for me to work with. And since we heat emboss them, you can see that it's very easy to color in each section, and the water actually gets contained within that embossed area. So it's really easy to do some shading effect. So I'm going to speed this up even more so you can see the whole process, and I'll try not to talk the majority part of it, but once I zoom in, you'll be able to see how I am working with each petal, going lightest to the darkest, and then going back later on to drop more colors. When it comes to working with watercolors, you have to understand that it'll dry a lot softer than you think, so keep that in mind when working with it. And also know that you can always add more colors later on instead of starting with the darkest shade first or the more intense area first. So keep that in mind, and I hope you enjoy the coloring. I hope you enjoyed coloring session with me, and I certainly hope that you get to try this technique as well. It's really therapeutic, it calms you and relaxes you. So once the main coloring part is all done, I'm going to go ahead and add some splatter. And if you followed me long enough, Nicole doesn't do watercoloring without adding some splatters on her card. So I'm just going to add a very, very light shade of Rock Collection from this watercolor pan set. All you have to do is add a clean water onto your acrylic block, drop some pigment to the intensity of the color that you want, and then go over the project area and flick the watercolor brush. You can see that it added a nice small drops, and I'm going to let that dry, and it's going to dry very light as well. You can also pick up the pigment with a clean tissue so that you can shorten the time that it takes for the paper to absorb, and also it lightened the intensity of the color as well. And I wanted to add a bit of blue as well, so I'm going to add a starry night color onto the splatter mixing as well, and flick it, and you can see that I dropped some big drops here, which is perfectly fine. I wanted to add a bit of vintage look. I'm going to go ahead and pick this up because I don't want it to stay onto my paper too long. I want the color and the splatter very light and airy. Now, for the last one, I'm going to use some shimmery. I thought it could use a bit of sparkles for the recipient who's going to get this card. And I'm going to drop a iridescent pigment onto it. This is actually a spray, but I didn't want to add lots of fine mist onto my card, so I decided to take out the nozzle part and just drop it just like the way that you would do for any splatter effect that you want on your card. And I'm going to let that dry once everything is dropped. You're going to let that dry once it reaches the amount that you want. I'm going to go ahead and trim this down now to the size that I want. So I'm going to cut 1/2 inch to the width. So this is going to be a 4-inch wide panel. I cut 1/4 inch off of each end. And then for the height, I'm going to use just one side and cut it. And I'm going to cut this at 5 1/4. Now our panel is ready. So let's go ahead and now assemble the card. We're almost there and complete the project together. We're going to use a fun foam pad as a sandwich in between so that it holds the watercolor nice and flat. I am using Be Creative tape on both sides of the sandwich so that I can add them onto the card base. I am using Nina Solar 110-pound card for the card base, and obviously we're creating a top folding card here as well. So you're going to cut that at 4 1/4 by 11 and then score in half at 5 1/2 mark and fold that to create a long top folding card. For the other side of the foam pad, I am also using lots of Be Creative tapes. I want this to stay strong and stay flat. And this also adds a nice dimension onto your card. All right, for the sentiment, I am going to use Not Yet Released stamp set. This is actually a sentiment stripe number 2 and sentiment strips number 2, excuse me. And this is actually going to release later on this month for the April release by Altenew. And I really wanted to create a birthday card because my birthday card stashes are running quite a bit low, so I wanted to add something, a birthday theme card to my current card inventory. So I'm going to use that. So I can't really show you the product just yet, but you can see the finished sentiment. And before I finish the card, I wanted to make sure I can use the grid line, so I cleared up all of my desk. I'm going to use the grid line on my work mat and add the sentiment straight up, and I use a foam tape for that one. And that finishes the card for today. I know it was a long video than normally what I do, but I really appreciate you sticking around and enjoying the video tutorial with me. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of it, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, I hope you hit subscribe because I'm going to share more projects in the upcoming weeks, so I hope you can join me. If you're interested in any of the products that I use in today's video, make sure to click the description area right below the video, or you can go to my website at scrapsandstems.com for a full project photos, close-up photos, and a full supplies list as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.